The smell of charred meat lingered in the cool evening air as Caleb disposed of the barbecue scraps. His movements were brisk but distracted, his thoughts clouded by the peculiar tension in his home. A sharp chill ran down his spine, a sensation he couldn't ignore. Something was wrong, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. The party had been Laura's idea, a chance for her to mingle with her colleagues from a Vanacorp celebrating her recent promotion. She'd insisted it was necessary, a gesture of gratitude to her team. Caleb had complied reluctantly, sensing her excitement. But as the evening unfolded, unease gnawed at the edges of his mind. From the deck, Caleb's eyes swept over the brightly lit living room. Laughter echoed through the glass, the kind of forced camaraderie that grated on his nerves. Laura's co-workers, 5 of them, lounged comfortably, sipping margaritas she prepared. The way they interacted with her felt off, too familiar, too intimate. Laura stood in the kitchen doorway, casting a quick glance over her shoulder, her eyes darting toward the deck where Caleb remained unseen. Her movements were cautious, calculated. She held a drink in her hand, her fingers gripping the glass tightly, as though it contained a secret. When she was hiding, Caleb stepped back into the shadows, his heart pounding. He wasn't prone to paranoia, but the sinking feeling in his gut was undeniable. Over the years, he'd learned to trust that instinct, and tonight, it screamed louder than ever. He watched as Laura returned to the group, her face lit with a smile he had once cherished. But now, that same smile fell hollow. Forced, Caleb decided to act. He couldn't ignore the sense that something sinister was unfolding in his home. Caleb wiped his hands on a dish towel, his gaze fixed on the living room through the glass doors. Every fiber of his being told him something was amiss. His wife, Laura, had always been outgoing and charming, but tonight, her energy felt different. It wasn't the warmth he'd fallen in love with. This was something else too eager, too accommodating. He forced himself to remain calm. Maybe it was the tequila, he reasoned. Laura had always been a lightweight, and margaritas were her weakness. But as she returned to the kitchen to refill the glasses, Caleb noticed something odd. She paused before pouring the drinks, her movements deliberate. From his vantage point, he could see her pulling a small envelope from her pocket. He frowned, leaning forward slightly. Laura opened the envelope and tipped a fine powder into one of the glasses. Her eyes darted toward the deck again, as though checking if he was watching. Caleb quickly stepped out of view, his pulse racing. Why the hell is she spiking a drink? And whose? His first thought was that it might be some kind of prank. Laura loved harmless jokes, but the look on her face as she stirred the powder into the drink erased that possibility. There was no humor in her expression, just cold determination. When she finished, she carried the tray of glasses back into the living room, leaving the spiked drink on the counter. Caleb's mind raced. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. As quietly as he could, he slipped into the kitchen. The spiked drink was still there, the powder fully dissolved. He lifted it to his nose, but couldn't detect anything unusual. His eyes drifted to the cabinet where Laura kept their medicines. He opened it and immediately saw the bottle of sleeping pills sitting at the front, half empty. His chest tightened. This wasn't just a cruel joke. Laura was planning something far more serious. Caleb, Laura's voice startled him, and he quickly set the glass down, pretending to inspect the sink. Yeah, he called back, keeping his tone casual. Are you almost done out there? Everyone's asking for you. He turned to see her standing in the doorway, her smile warm, but her eyes guarded. Just finishing up, he replied. Give me 5 minutes. She nodded and disappeared back into the living room. Caleb exhaled slowly, his hands trembling. He needed to keep his cool, but his mind was spiraling. Why would Laura drug him? Was she planning to knock him out? And for what reason? The laughter in the living room grew louder, pulling him from his thoughts. Caleb's jaw tightened as he grabbed a dish rag, wiping down the already clean counter to buy himself time. Caleb's mind refused to stop racing as he methodically wiped down the countertop, trying to make sense of what he'd just witnessed. He had loved Laura for years, trusted her implicitly, and yet the evidence he'd seen was undeniable. She had drugged his drink. Why? For a moment, his thoughts drifted to the party. Laura's co-workers, 5 men, were all still lounging in the living room, their laughter carrying faintly through the walls. He didn't know them well, but he'd always felt they treated him like an outsider. They laughed too hard at his jokes, spoke too softly when addressing him, and often traded looks that made his skin crawl. Caleb inhaled deeply and forced himself to think clearly. He couldn't let his suspicions consume him without proof. That's what his father had always taught him. Don't accuse until you know. He dumped the rest of the drink down the sink and rinsed the glass thoroughly, his jaw tightening. Whatever Laura was planning, she wasn't going to catch him off guard. He returned to the deck, cleaned the barbecue meticulously, and then walked back inside. "Hey! There you are." Laura greeted him cheerfully as he entered the kitchen. "I made you a drink. It's on the counter." Caleb's stomach turned, but he kept his expression neutral. "Thanks," he said, lifting the now empty glass and pretending to take a sip. "Tastes great." Laura watched him for a moment, her gaze sharp, but then she nodded. "Good. Why don't you relax in the den? The guys and I are just going to hang out for a bit." Caleb forced a smile. "Sure. Don't let me interrupt." He walked through the kitchen and into the den, his heart pounding in his chest. As soon as he was out of sight, he stopped to listen. Faintly, he heard Laura speaking to her coworkers, her tone casual but low. "He's out for the night," she said. "We're good to go." Caleb's blood ran cold. The sound of footsteps carried down the hall as Laura and one of the men left the living room. Caleb flattened himself against the wall, his breath shallow, and waited for the sounds to recede. As soon as they were gone, he moved silently toward the formal lounge, slipping behind a door frame where he could observe the group without being seen. The remaining men were laughing, their voices growing louder with every drink. One of them leaned back in his chair, a smug grin on his face as he looked toward the hallway. "She's something else, isn't she?" the man said, swirling his glass. "Can't believe she got him to go along with it." Another replied with a chuckle. "Must be one hell of a marriage." Caleb's hands clenched into fists. "Laura's the whole package," the first man continued. "Smart, beautiful, and willing to take risks. I don't know how she puts up with a guy like him." The group laughed again, and Caleb's stomach churned. He forced himself to stay still to keep listening. "Doesn't matter," another man said. "She's ours for the night. That's all that counts." Caleb could feel the heat rising in his chest, his vision blurring with anger. He had heard enough. Back in the den, Caleb paced the floor, his mind racing with possibilities. Confronting them outright was tempting, but he knew he'd lose control and possibly do something he'd regret. No! This required something bigger, smarter. If they thought he was asleep, then he'd let them believe it. Quietly, he moved toward the guest bedroom and laid down on the bed. He shifted onto his stomach, letting his body go limp as he rehearsed what he would do next. The sound of muffled laughter drifted from upstairs, followed by footsteps on the stairs. They were moving toward the master bedroom. His heart ached, but his resolve hardened. Laura had betrayed him in the most unthinkable way, and she wasn't going to get away with it. Caleb lay motionless in the guest bedroom, forcing his breath to slow, his body as still as death. The creak of footsteps passed just outside the door, the voices of the men murmuring in conversation as they ascended the stairs. His heart hammered in his chest, but he didn't move, straining his ears to catch every sound. Laughter and whispers grew louder, mixing with Laura's voice. It was light, teasing, a tone Caleb knew well, one he'd once thought was reserved for him. Now it cut through him like a knife. He waited for several long minutes, listening as the voices faded into the distance and the upstairs floor grew quiet. Then, with every ounce of care, he rolled off the bed and crept toward the door. He pressed his ear to it, ensuring the hallway was empty before slowly turning the knob. The hallway stretched out before him, dim and silent. Caleb moved like a shadow, his bare feet soundless on the carpet as he approached the staircase. From the top floor, faint noises filtered down, muted laughter, the low thrum of voices, and the occasional burst of something far more intimate. His jaw tightened as he continued up the stairs, careful to avoid the creaky spots he knew too well. The closer he got, the clearer the sounds became. He paused at the master bedroom door, where light spilled faintly from the gap beneath. Inside, Laura's voice rose in a sultry laugh, accompanied by the deeper tones of one of the men. Caleb felt his stomach turn as the weight of their betrayal pressed down on him. He didn't need to open the door to confirm what was happening. As Good already knew for a moment, he considered bursting in, demanding answers, venting his rage, but he held himself back. There would be no satisfaction in confronting them now, not without a plan. This wasn't just about his anger, it was about making them pay. He crept back downstairs, his mind racing. He needed leverage, something that would destroy their lives as thoroughly as they were trying to destroy his. In the kitchen, Caleb found his first weapon, Laura's phone. It was still plugged into the charger on the counter, unlocked and waiting. He grabbed it and began scrolling through her messages, searching for proof of her betrayal. It didn't take long. There were texts from one of the men, Ryan, if the contact name was accurate, filled with suggestive comments and plans for their sessions. Caleb's hands trembled as he read the messages, each one confirming what he already suspected. Laura had been planning this for months, using him as nothing more than a convenient obstacle to overcome. Then he found the photos. His stomach twisted as he swiped through image after image. Laura in various states of undress. Posing for the camera, her expression one of brazen confidence. Some of the photos included the men, their faces grinning smugly as they stood far too close to her. The final nail in the coffin was a video. Caleb hesitated before pressing play, knowing it would change everything. But he needed to see. He needed to know. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Laura was on their bed, surrounded by the men, her laughter echoing through the speakers as they egged her on. Caleb's blood boiled as he slammed the phone down on the counter, his mind reeling with anger and betrayal. Caleb didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table, planning his next move. He wasn't just going to expose Laura. He was going to destroy her. And the men who had conspired with her, they wouldn't escape and scathed either. By dawn, he had a plan. First, he copied the incriminating texts, photos, and videos onto a flash drive, ensuring he had multiple backups. Then he found Ryan's jacket draped over a chair in the living room. Inside, he located Ryan's phone. It was unlocked just like Laura's. A bitter smile curled Caleb's lips as he set Ryan's phone to record. He slipped upstairs, the phone clutched tightly in his hand. The sounds coming from the master bedroom were quieter now, but still unmistakable. Carefully, Caleb cracked the door open just enough to capture the scene on video. The sight of Laura entwined with the men was like a dagger to his heart, but he didn't flinch. He recorded for just long enough to get clear faces before retreating back downstairs. Once in the kitchen, he sent the video to Ryan's entire contact list. The fallout began almost immediately. Caleb stayed out of sight, hiding in the den as Ryan's phone exploded with notifications. Upstairs, the laughter turned to confusion as more phones buzzed with incoming messages. "What the hell is this?" One of the men shouted. "Ryan, what did you do? I didn't send this." Ryan's voice was frantic. Laura's voice cut through the chaos. "What's going on? What video?" Caleb didn't wait to hear the rest. He stepped outside into the cool morning air, his chest heaving as he fought to keep his emotions in check. This was only the beginning. He wasn't done with him yet. The cool dawn air wrapped around Caleb as he stood outside, leaning against the railing of the porch. His mind was a storm of emotions, rage, betrayal, heartbreak. But above all, a cold clarity had settled over him. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Inside, chaos reigned. Caleb could hear muffled shouts from upstairs as the reality of what had happened began to sink in. Phones buzzed, accusations flew, and Laura's voice rose above the rest. frantic and panicked. "What video?" she demanded again. "Ryan, you idiot," another man yelled. "Why would you record that?" "I didn't. Someone else." The sound of heavy footsteps pounded on the stairs as one of the men came storming down. Caleb ducked into the shadows, watching as the man grabbed his jacket and headed out the front door, muttering curses under his breath. One down, Caleb thought, a grim satisfaction curling in his chest. He slipped back into the kitchen, careful to stay out of sight. Laura's phone was still on the counter, buzzing intermittently with incoming messages. Caleb couldn't resist picking it up again, scrolling through the barrage of replies to the video. Unknown contact. "Laura, what the hell is this? Christine, you're disgusting. Don't come near me or my family again. Dad, call me. Now." Caleb's lips tightened as he read the messages. He could only imagine the fallout Laura was experiencing at this moment. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. By mid-morning, the house was eerily quiet. The men had all left, slipping out one by one with hurried excuses and panicked expressions. Laura was the last to come downstairs, her face pale and drawn. She looked around the living room, her hands trembling as she began to pick up the empty glasses and scattered remnants of the party. Caleb watched her from the doorway, his presence unnoticed. There was no remorse in her expression, only fear. Fear of what this would do to her career, her reputation. It was the final confirmation he needed. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done to him. She was only sorry she'd been caught. "Good morning," Caleb said, his voice cold and flat. Laura froze, the glass in her hand slipping and shattering on the floor. She turned slowly to face him, her eyes wide with shock. "See, Caleb, I didn't realize you were awake." "I wasn't," he replied, stepping into the room, "but I woke up just in time to see the aftermath of your little celebration." Her face crumpled, tears springing to her eyes. "Caleb, I can explain, don't bother." He cut her off. "I've seen everything I need to see, and so has everyone else." Her eyes widened in horror as she realized what he meant. "You send it? The video?" He nodded, his expression unyielding. "I sent it to Ryan's entire contact list, and I saved a few copies for myself just in case." "Caleb, please," she begged, stepping toward him. "You don't understand?" "I understand perfectly," he said, his voice rising. "I understand that the woman I loved, the woman I trusted with everything, decided I wasn't enough for her. I understand that you lied to me, drugged me, and humiliated me in my own home." Tears streamed down her face as she fell to her knees, clutching at his hands. "I made a mistake, Caleb. A terrible mistake, but I love you. Please, we can fix this." "We can't." "You don't love me," he said, pulling his hands away. "You love yourself. And now you're going to face the consequences." Caleb left Laura sobbing on the floor as he walked out of the house. He needed space, air, anything to clear his head and keep himself from doing something rash. He drove aimlessly for hours, replaying the events of the last 24 hours in his mind. The betrayal, the rage, the satisfaction of his revenge. It all churned inside him, a toxic mix of emotions he couldn't escape. When he finally returned home, the house was empty. Laura's car was gone, along with her suitcase and a few personal belongings. She'd left a note on the kitchen table, written in her neat, flowing script. "Caleb, I'm sorry for everything. I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. I've ruined everything we had, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I'm leaving to give you the space you need. I hope one day you can find happiness again. Laura." Caleb crumpled the note in his hand, his jaw tightening. He wasn't sure if he felt relief or disappointment. She was gone, but the damage she'd done remained. Over the following weeks, Caleb's revenge continued to unfold. He shared the evidence with Laura's parents, her friends, and even her boss out of Anacorp. The fallout was catastrophic. Laura lost her job, her reputation in shambles. Her family disowned her, refusing to take her calls or acknowledge her existence. The men she conspired with faced their own consequences: divorces, firings, and public humiliation. But for Caleb, the victory fell hollow. No amount of revenge could erase the pain of her betrayal or the scars it left behind. In the quiet of his now empty home, he began to pick up the pieces of his life, determined to move forward. But the memory of Laura's laughter, her smile, her betrayal lingered, a constant reminder of the love he'd lost and the revenge that had consumed him. Over the next few weeks, the fallout from Caleb's actions spread like wildfire. The video continued to make rounds, seeding chaos in the lives of Laura's colleagues. Caleb heard whispers from mutual acquaintances about divorces, firings, and even criminal investigations into workplace misconduct. The men who had conspired with Laura were scrambling to salvage what remained of their lives. Laura, meanwhile, was nowhere to be found. Caleb had considered tracking her down, confronting her one last time. But each time he stopped himself. What could she say that would make any difference? Her betrayal had cut too deep, and her absence now was a relief more than anything. Yet in the quiet of his evenings, as he sat alone in their once shared home, the weight of it all began to settle on Caleb. Revenge had been satisfying in the moment, but now it left an emptiness he couldn't shake. One night, as he sorted through the remnants of the party, broken glasses, discarded decorations, and the haunting stillness of the house, he came across a photo album Laura had kept in the closet. Flipping through the pages, he saw the happier moments of their life together. Their wedding day, vacations, lazy Sunday mornings captured in candid shots. Each image was a reminder of what they had once been, before deceit and betrayal tore it apart. For the first time, Caleb felt something other than anger. He felt loss. Months passed, and Caleb began the slow process of rebuilding his life. He sold the house, unable to bear the memories that lingered within its walls, and moved to a smaller place across town. He started going to therapy, a reluctant step suggested by a close friend, and found solace in unraveling the emotions he buried beneath his revenge. One day, he received an unexpected letter. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable Laura's. For a moment, Caleb considered throwing it away. What could she possibly say that he hadn't already heard or imagined? But curiosity won out, and he opened it. "Caleb, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, and I don't blame you, but I need you to know that I've spent every day since I left trying to understand the choices I made and the pain I caused. There's no excuse for what I did, and I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, you were everything to me, Caleb. You gave me love, stability, and a life I didn't deserve. I let my own insecurities and desires destroy that. I thought I could keep those parts of myself separate from us, but I was wrong. When you exposed the truth, it forced me to confront who I'd become, and I hated what I saw. I've left the city. I'm trying to rebuild myself, piece by piece. I hope one day you can find peace, just as I'm searching for mine. You deserve happiness, Caleb. I hope you find it. Laura." Caleb read the letter twice, his emotions in tangled knot. It didn't change what she'd done, but it didn't feel like a ploy either. Her words carried the weight of genuine regret. For the first time, Caleb allowed himself to think about the future, not one defined by Laura's betrayal, but one where he could rebuild himself, just as she claimed she was doing. Months turned into a year, and Caleb found himself slowly healing. He reconnected with old friends, took up new hobbies, and even started dating again. Trust was a challenge, but he was learning to let people in one step at a time, one evening. As he walked along the beach, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Caleb felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in a long time. Revenge had been a chapter of his story, but it wasn't the end. It was time to write the next one,